Stark Future came out of nowhere with the Varg all-electric dirt bike in 2019, and this bike seems to be already changing the conversation around electric dirt bikes. Seems to me like we need to have a conversation about it. Welcome to Motofam Talks. So first and foremost, let's just talk about electric dirt bikes. They have been around for a little while now. We've seen Alta come and go. We've even seen some other companies come into the mix with a bike called the Storm Bee. Now, the reason why the Stark Varg seems to be in a different place than the rest of them is because it is a legitimate dirt bike. It is not a crossover mountain bike. It's not an underpowered dirt bike. In fact, these bikes supposedly boast two different models, one of which is supposed to be a 60 horsepower and the other is supposed to be an 80 horsepower. 80 horsepower for a dirt bike is huge power. Most production bikes that you buy right off the showroom floor will not have 80 horsepower. One of the other things that's also setting apart Stark is the bike actually looks good. I mean, it's a good looking bike. It does not look like a toy. But looks and performance aside, there is a huge gap between who likes the bike and who likes the idea of an electric dirt bike and who does not. So some things that you should know about the Stark Varg. It is not in production yet. We only know what we've been told and what some of the pros and bigger companies have actually been able to tell us about the bike. Couple of things that are really interesting. One, this is a chromoly frame with a subframe towards the front of the bike that is made of carbon fiber. The battery itself actually acts as a part of the frame. So although the battery is removable, Stark Future has specifically stated that they really haven't designed the bike for the battery to be swapped out. The idea is that the battery stays in and you plug it in and charge it. Now, when it comes to charging, it is a 2-hour charge time for the battery, which leads us to the very next question. How long can you ride it? And that is probably one of the first major contention points about this bike. If you go to the website, it will actually tell you that a hard moto style ride will get you about 30 minutes of ride time. But on the other hand, light recreational riding is supposed to get you 6 hours worth. A 30 to 6 hour gap is a huge gap. It's hard to know for your average rider how long they're going to be able to go out to the track for if they're a beginner. Or think about your average trail, dune, or off-road rider who might go on 2 or 3 hour rides. Obviously, one of the worst things as a trail rider is not knowing how much time until you have to go back to camp, which also doesn't help the popularity of this bike. One thing to note is that although the motor, battery, and frame itself is a proprietary setup by Stark Future, the suspension setup is not. It's actually KYB, which is awesome. Many a KYB rider will tell you that it's some of the best suspension out on the market, but it is not the same as your YZ450 or 250F in your garage. Obviously, the suspension has to be valved for the overall weight and weight distribution of that battery inside of the motor. One thing that is really interesting to me in regards to the design is obviously an electric bike does not need a clutch. You turn the throttle and there's power for days. So there's no gear shifting, which means there's no clutch side lever. What's awesome about that, or kind of odd depending on how you look at it, is that leaves open a option for you to have your rear brake as a lever on your clutch side. Some people I know for a fact would love that. But I do think that if you're used to having a clutch on that side and you're used to stomping on that rear brake, it's gonna have a learning curve attached to it. Let's talk about this divide that we're seeing in the community in regards to electric dirt bikes. There seems to be kind of 3 camps, but we're gonna focus on 2. First camp is the all-in camp. It does seem like this camp is growing slowly but surely as more people start to either understand or have actually physically ridden the bike, and that definitely has to do with a lot of the pros that have hopped on this bike. They've all said that the power is there, they're extremely rideable, it just takes time to get used to the power delivery. On top of that, the positive of having an opportunity to ride this bike basically anywhere because of how quiet it is. You can literally hear the person next to you on the same bike talking to you, which is great. Imagine being out trail riding and being able to talk to somebody about where you want to go or what you're going to do, or if you're going to stop for PB&Js, instead of having to use hand signals or tell somebody to pull over so you can have that conversation. Number two is this new conversation about urban moto. Having a dirt bike that is so quiet that you can ride it in your backyard basically makes it that if you have a little piece of land, you can make a track and your neighbors aren't going to get upset from the loud noise that's coming out of your bike. That, to me, in and of itself, is a huge plus. It opens the door to so many more people coming into our sport. You have people who maybe have never ridden a dirt bike in their life. The learning curve is obviously going to be a whole lot shorter on how to ride the bike because there's no clutch, there's no gear changing, and all the things that are associated with riding a traditional gas-powered bike. Moreover, think about how many more tracks could be built and where they could be built. If you could have inner city tracks where kids who would never be able to pick up a bike and drive 2 hours to their nearest track could have an indoor track in the city. It is definitely a possibility. So let's talk about the other side of this. Now, there are people that are hard nose on the electric dirt bike thing. I've spoken to them myself and on my social media, and they have some good points. Firstly, one of the biggest things that is always talked about when it comes to electric bikes is the ride time. Like we spoke about before, is why would you bring a bike to the track to ride it for 30 minutes to hook it up to a generator that burns gas to refill it after 2 hours to get another 30-minute ride out of it? That is a big one. You can't get around the fact that I can fill up my dirt bike, do a 30-minute moto, fill it up again, and go immediately back out. Obviously, with new technology in the years to come, we might see those charge times come down and the ride times go up, but until that happens, we are stuck with 30-minute motos or 6 hours of recreational ride, which who knows what that means because it's so vague. Top of that, one of the funnier conversations that I keep having with people is the fact that you don't hear the motor, you don't hear the brap coming out of the pipe, which seems like a very small thing, but when an entire industry is based upon the pipe that you can buy aftermarket for your dirt bike and you want it to make that grunt, you're not going to get that out of an electric bike unless you put like a speaker on it that makes that sound for you. Now, that might seem like a very small bit of the bigger picture, but to dudes who finely tune their bikes, it does make sense. Which brings me to kind of my last point and kind of a question at the same time is, what are you going to be able to do with the bike? There have been whispers of people saying, well, yeah, you'll be able to hook your bike up to a computer, download software, adjust the power curve, things of that nature, just not getting into the motor, obviously, because there's nothing to work on there. But on the other hand, think about how awesome it is not to have to maintenance an air filter, do oil changes. When dirt biking comes to charge your bike, spray the chain, rip it up, come back home, wash your bike, spray the chain, and do it all over again, I mean, that's very hard to argue with on the funometer. So I'm going to pose the question to you guys. What is it that you are for or against when it comes to electric dirt bikes, especially the Stark Varg? What are your guys' thoughts on this? And if you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe, like this video, and we'll do a part 2 on a different one. Later, guys.